So the SSOPs and FDA has regulations. They talk about water safety, the cleanliness of equipment, tools, product contact surfaces, the prevention of cross-contamination, hand washing and sanitizing, toilet facilities. You got protection from chemical, biological, and physical contaminants, which are all your hazards. You got the control of toxic compounds. You have employee hygiene, and you have pest control. All these are included within FDA HACCP regulations. So when you're talking about these, what are you actually referring to? When it comes to implementation, you're talking about monitoring the sanitation activities in these key areas. So how are you got your plans, right, which are SSOPs. How are you implementing? How are you making sure that these activities in these key areas, the critical areas, are correct? You got record keeping, which is super important, because if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. They must show that the monitoring of the activities and any corrections have been taken appropriately within the specified amount of time. So the SSOP would state if something is out of whack, and I identify it, what the time limit is in order to get it back in shape. So that's so very important. SSOP regulations is not about you being 100%. What you need to know is that you need to have a decent starting point, right? But when you see things and issues arise, it's so much about, how you react to that stuff versus it happening in the first place. The first thing I'll ask you is, okay, what did you do? How did you document it? Who did you communicate with? How did you implement that into the plan moving forward? What did you do on the other lines, or the other systems, to prevent it from happening again, right? That is the most important piece, rather than it happening in the first place. SSOPs for meat and poultry. You got written SSOPs are required, so what we talked about already, and they must identify procedures to prevent direct product contamination. They should include procedures to be performed, the individuals responsible, and the frequency of each task. They must identify daily pre-op procedures. So what are you doing on a daily basis to make sure things are clean around here? Identify daily operational procedures. So what are you doing while we're running? So pre-op is before we're running. Daily operationals while we're running. What are you doing? They must be signed and dated, and the establishment must take initiative, corrective, and preventive actions. Daily records must be maintained, preferably by a HACCP supervisor or or operation supervisor, one person, so they can check the trends and everything about it around this. Because once you have 5 different people, 6 different people, 3 different departments trying to manage this thing, you don't really get a understanding holistically of what the trends look like, and when you need to have a moment to intervene in your system because things aren't working. It's so very important to have that intervention when you have issues going wrong, and you see it over time in these daily op procedures and stuff when you do a review. So proper implementation of the prerequisite programs simplifies the development of a HACCP program. Prerequisite programs make things so much easier when they are easy to be followed, when they are covering the right things, and everyone is working together as a team in order to execute. Prerequisite programs should be well documented with the written SOPs. They should be adhered to by all employees. When we talk, it's everybody owns food safety just like they own human safety. It must be reviewed and revised as needed and effective when accomplishing objectives. So to get around, talk about establishing prerequisite programs. The documentation piece, 9 times out of 10, if you're not, unless you are developing a manufacturer, you haven't even started running in a manufacturing facility, 9 times out of 10, this stuff is already done. But when you're talking about the documentation, you're going to ask yourself what procedures should be performed, at what frequency, who's responsible, and what actions should be taken if the things did not happen, right? If the procedure is not performed as is required, if there's an unexpected outcome when you do perform the procedure, you need to understand what that is. And one of the reasons why you do that is so that if, let's say Rick is a guy who's been working there for 20 years already, right? He knows all this. He knows what the procedures are, what the frequency is, who has responsibility, what action should be taken. If he knows all this stuff, right, we're working perfectly fine because Rick works 12-hour days. He don't take any vacation. Only time he takes vacation is when the plant's down and when we're not running that system, right? So we've been running beautifully. And then Rick gets sick. What do you do now? Rick gets sick and, it's a big one, right? He survives, but he caught COVID, right? What do you do when Rick's at home? You can't ask Rick to come back. You can't talk on the phone with Rick. You need that documentation to accurately state what Rick's been doing to keep us going and keep the system healthy. So that is why we have documentation, and it's so very important for it to be accurate. Whenever changes have been made, they need to be documented appropriately so that anybody can come look at the documentation and know what they need to do with the system to make sure it runs properly. When it comes to employee training, so continuing education like HACCP certification, that's part of the prerequisite program. Important to understand and follow the assigned tasks to them. So sometimes I've seen it before. We put a body there, but they don't fully understand the task. You need to make sure as a leader, and if you're taking this course, you are a leader and has to be a leader in your facility. If you see something like that where an individual doesn't necessarily understand the assigned task for them, it is your responsibility to make sure that someone knows about it, because eventually that will cause some issues, right? It's going to cause some issues and put extra work and extra load and extra stress on everyone, because when issues arise at a manufacturing facility, I've never seen it where it doesn't cause some level of stress with everyone, because in order for things to run smoothly, you got to have a maintenance team there. You got to have, safety. You got to have everybody. So when issues happen, every department gets hit, right? So when you think about it that way, from a preventative standpoint, you see people that don't know what they're supposed to be doing or don't know what they don't really grasp. Maybe they're doing it, but they don't understand what's going on. You can kind of tell that. Then we need to speak up. Providing time and materials for the training, that's a very important piece as well. And then verifying by review performance. And that whole piece right there is like so very key when you're pulling somebody in and getting them trained. I understand we may be running at 80% of our what do they call it? Standard production. We may be running a subset, a portion of what we could be running, but it's not that. That's not more important. That output, that production is not more important than the safety of our employees and the safety of our consumers, which is food safety. Verification of prerequisite programs. So that's periodic review of the SSOPs or the SSOPs. And the SOPs is just operational procedures. SSOPs refers specifically to standard sanitation, standard operation procedure. So standard, I keep saying standard, specifically related to sanitation and not just the operation. So periodic review of the SOPs and SSOPs, audit reports to ensure that the programs are operating in a manner that should not require a change in the hazard analysis or the HACCP plan. It's the same, like you need to make sure that when you verify these prerequisite programs, that is everything lining up correctly. And it's okay if it doesn't, but if it doesn't, let's have that conversation. Let's block out some time in order to make things right. And when you do that, once again, it's like, okay, now I got to get with my operations team. I got to get with my maintenance team, maybe logistics team, to make sure that, folks are understanding exactly what's going on. So when you talk about verification, it's asking these questions. Is the SOP performed in the manner intended? Is the procedure monitored correctly? Are there appropriate records being kept, and where are they being kept? Is there an independent audit done to verify all this stuff? And are the programs revised on the frequency necessary? Different kind of resources we have when you start talking about prerequisite programs is, are the proper tools and equipment available? Because if you don't have a proper tool or equipment, once again, you run into food safety issues, you run into human safety issues. If you have an issue, a problem with, so here's the thing. Sometimes you don't get the support that you need. So this is the real. Like, I love talking about this kind of stuff because it is so real in manufacturing facilities. I've been in multiple and I've seen it happen in every one. Sometimes you're crying wolf and they're saying, oh, the girls crying wolf. They don't believe you. And you say, no, actually, we need a proper tool. We need this, we need that. And it's going to cost this amount of money, or I need some time with your employees in order to, get them to understand how to use this tool, right? But if you don't get that, you need to understand who can work for you, who are your advocates, right? And so this one in particularly calls out, for me, human safety. Talk to your human safety manager sometimes, because if you don't have the proper tool for the employee to do their work, and it's causing a food safety issue, chances are they could potentially be causing also a human safety issue, which is a big deal. Right. So this is how you start getting work done. This is how you maneuver in the arena, and you start getting allies with you. Right. And you start working towards making sure that, you're using influence from all different areas. Maybe it's causing a maintenance issue. Maybe because we don't have a proper tool, we are creating, we're causing maintenance to perform a PM on this system more frequently than they should. And you don't know that, or maybe the operations manager or, someone doesn't necessarily see that, right? They don't have that line of sight. So that's why it's so very important for you to understand your processing team, your system team, so that, and everybody's on the same accord, because some things may be happening behind the scenes that could, help you plead your case as to why we need to spend some money on this new tool. Are appropriate personnel available to perform the task effectively? Right. So, sometimes people are just, not there because they feel like they don't need to be there. Right. So that's another piece. Are systems adequate for monitoring and storing the data? Now this starts talking more so for the, like IT engineering, or, these processing systems engineering engineers that are running the systems on the computer, right? Is this stuff documenting or monitoring the data, the system, the way that it should, such that we know when an issue arises right before it happens, when we're catching it. So all very important stuff when you're talking about, making sure the system is healthy and running as it should. So this slide is going to differentiate between the prerequisite program and HACCP. Talk about directly dealing with food safety issues immediately, like it's all about that. It's definitely the HACCP plan. If it's indirect, then it's a food safety, with food safety issues, it's a prerequisite program. Talking about crossing multiple product lines, it's probably a prerequisite program. If it's specific to any one line, you're probably talking about a HACCP plan. If it's a failure that seldom results in food safety hazards, you're probably talking about prerequisite program. If it's deviations that must be considered due to potential food safety hazards, then most likely you're talking about the HACCP plan. And, basically when it screams food safety, 9 times out of 10, you're talking about the HACCP plan. when you have issues that come about that potentially could cause, food safety issues if it was, kind of blown up a little bit, or if it happens at a higher frequency or something like that, then you're talking prerequisite. Depending on the results of the hazard analysis and identification of control measures, some activities normally addressed in the prerequisite program may be included in the HACCP plan. Now, obviously, that's a case-by-case basis, depends on the facility you're working in, and how you guys are deciding as a quality food safety team, as a HACCP team.